more than being at sea. What was amazing for us, I have so many stories. I could just go on and on and on. A woman who was so renowned for her strength. The guys had carried 100-pound bag. She carried 2. There are stories of, she was apparently very attractive. She was in the late 1800s. These guys making, what did they say, trying to have their pleasure with her when she was alone, aka assaulting her. And she would end up, the whole town would go, these are all said to be, this happened about 3 or 4 times apparently, these are all said to be, because she was very independent, she got by herself all the time. And the townspeople would just go, okay, we'll see what happens now. Nobody would ever worry about going and saving her. And there's these great stories. There's a story, one guy went up into an attic to try and assault her basically while she's up there spinning. And the next thing, she's going down the attic stairs with him under her arm, with his trousers around his ankles, swearing his head off at her. She takes him, carries him through the town, and tosses him into the ocean. The people said they thanked her a lot for that. So these are amazing stories, and they're their stories, and their words, a lot of them. It's phenomenal. What was remarkable is the Icelanders didn't know anything about this. So what happened? This whole history has been erased. It makes us realize how much we can, all of us, this is not Iceland, we all do this, is we create a reality. We create our history. We create what we think is reality, which is women were on shore. That only started to happen in the 1900s. They had no superstition before then either. But then you could see toward the beginning of the late 1800s, you begin to see it's a real shift. And this is when there was this, Iceland wanted to be trying to be more modern. They got much more influence from Europe. Things were dramatically changing. They didn't have an industrial revolution in Iceland. That was really when motors came to the boats. So they could go out further. They could get more fish. That revolutionized Iceland because then you needed boats to be in harbors instead of being dragged up to shore. And everybody then moved to fishing communities. So a lot of the communities, not Stokkseyri is about 1,000 years old, but a lot of the other communities, and it's just scattered farms, which is the way it all was before. But a huge number of the ones that are actual fishing towns didn't start until 1900s, early 1900s, when they all went to harbors. It was at that time that you see him saying she was as good at sea as she was at the Nig. She liked to go to sea almost as much as she liked being in the kitchen. Probably more, right? She, and then you get to see it changing, saying, there's trying to say that these women were like hags, that they're not feminine, and they should be feminine. They starts to be they're seen as bad people. It's very interesting. And then you get the women being on shore and the men going out in trawlers in the early 1900s, but it doesn't happen until then. But starting in the 1930s, they crawl all the way back on. First as cooks on the herring boats, and later in the 40s they worked while the Icelandic men mostly, they did a lot of where they took fish, they basically fed Britain. They fed Britain during the war, and a lot of them died taking fish from Iceland across the water to England, and they were bombed a lot by the Germans. But that's what most of them did, and they kept Britain fed. Amazing service during the war. And the women stayed home and fished. They worked on the boats in Iceland. In the 50s, and now I've interviewed several hundred women from the 50s to the present who worked at sea. Current times, they have also filled all sorts of roles. They've been about between 10 to 13% of the fishing fleet. I can get statistics from the 90s, but I can see in the 70s there was a surge. But now it became a feminist act. Now they knew they were going against the current. And every single woman I talked to didn't know that there were other women doing it. They thought they were the only one. They were in their small communities. It was something they had to do alone. So they all had their stories of going against what everybody said they should be doing and going to sea. And how they finagled their way on. The skipper was drunk and he wanted to go to a dance, so she said she'd drive him there, but he had to take her his beer with her. They had all these great stories about it. And then they went to sea. They had worked as skippers. They take the small boat skipper license for boats 30 tons and less. in Iceland, the Icelandic, it's slang, but it's used by everybody. I've never heard another word, I've never heard whatever the formal word is for this. But what everybody calls the small boat skipper license is the Pomprö, which means scrotum test. Balls. Many women in Iceland have passed their balls. And they're marine engineers, they're deckhands, they're cooks. They're all, they were radio operators when they had the radios. And starting in the late 70s, then you got women going to the navigational school and becoming qualified to be on the largest vessels. So, I'll show you the pictures. I'm just going to do this at the end, but just stop around here, but I just want to say one thing that I thought was really fascinating that I found. I'll say something else too quickly, but I'm an anthropologist, so I read all the literature, everything that all the scholars have written in any, in English and any other language I can finagle my way through. All of them said there are very few women working at sea, and the reason they don't is because there's so much sexism on the boats, and the men harass them, and the men don't want them there, and so that's why they don't work at sea. Now, I must say, I did not find that. And I fished in Australia in the late 70s. Sexist country. I found that once they saw that I could do the work, it was just fine. Every single successful Icelandic woman, which about all of them I interviewed, there were a couple who, for reasons they couldn't handle it. As they say, working at sea is not for everybody, man or woman. You have to be a specific kind of person, and some people just aren't, man and women. But for all those who stayed at sea and were successful, every single one of them said that after, this is in the 1900s, is more recent, up to the present, 2000s, that after they went through a proving period that they now had to go through because it was the idea women weren't strong enough, couldn't do it, that's all part of Iceland's idea now. Once they passed that, the men became their best friends. And I saw this. I went to a lot of parties, a lot of drinking, a lot of fun, and they were obviously their best friends. They said, though, that the continued discrimination was from shore. And it was from both men and women. And it went for years. And they said, you're a dyker or a whore, and sometimes you're both, in the estimation of the people on shore. Say that again and again. So that's very different than, and I saw it. And I'll show you some pictures to show it. But, so I'll just show you some of these pictures just to give you an idea of some of the stuff I'm talking about. Go ahead. Yeah. This is, just to give you an idea, this is a very, very calm seas in a place where I've spent a lot of time going to. But just to give you an idea of, for those of you who haven't seen Iceland, many of you have seen Norway, so you have an idea what the fjords look like. But, we're looking at pretty harsh circumstances. Yeah, that's okay. And on the north, although this is happening less and less with global warming, you have certain friends coming near the boats. She's off trawling in the winter. They talked to me, this one woman was just talking to me saying, oh yeah, when our boat got stuck in the ice, it was a problem. We had to get rescued by an icebreaker. I thought, bloody hell, that's really scary. Ice can crush. It's like the thing with even Shackleton and stuff. She goes, yeah, well, she's worked at sea for 40 years. Okay, go ahead, next one.